The virtual world and online dating have rapidly captured the hearts and minds of many people. Did you know that over 300 million people today find love online? That's almost the entire population of the United States, the third most populous country in the world. For some, the internet has been a lifeline and a real chance to build long-awaited relationships. I'm sure you've heard stories like this, maybe even among your own friends. But today, I want to share my story of a decade-long internet romance, one that turned out to never exist in reality. It all began in the spring of 2011. I was 31 years old and working as a radio presenter in West London. That night, my friends and I went out to a club in Brighton. We drank, danced, laughed, and had a great time. As the night wore on, it was already past 1 a.m. when a man in a turban walked into the club. He immediately caught my attention. Not only did he stand out in a British club, but I also realized I knew him. The more I looked, the more certain I became that this wasn't just a random person. This was Bobby Jandu, someone I'd been chatting with on Facebook for the past 6 months. We had shared some of the most intimate details of our lives, but I'd never met him in person, until now. Naturally, I decided to approach him and say hello. The man in the turban turned around as I greeted him. He seemed friendly and polite, but not as familiar as I expected. It felt like he didn't recognize me, probably because of the dim lighting in the club. With loud music playing, I clarified that my name was Kirat. Even then, Bobby didn't seem to recognize me. I thought it was odd but figured he might have had a few drinks, which could explain why he appeared confused. So, I wished him a good night and walked away. It didn't seem like a big deal at the time, just an awkward encounter. But that seemingly unremarkable moment set the course for the next 10 years of my life in a way I could never have imagined. Maybe I could have figured things out much earlier. Perhaps I could have saved myself from heartbreak and a shattered life. But to truly understand, let me take you back 6 months, to 2010. Back then, I was a 30-year-old radio presenter working for a local British station. I absolutely loved my job, captivating listeners with my voice. My career was stable, and I often hosted major events, festivals, and concerts. Life was vibrant and full of energy. Still, I was longing for the day I'd meet the right man to start a family with. That's where everything began, one message on Facebook in November 2010. I've always been selective about who I add as friends on Facebook, but Bobby Jandu's message caught my attention because we had many mutual connections. Hi, Kirat. This is JJ's brother. I hope you got Simran's message. She always speaks so highly of you. I didn't know Bobby personally, but I did know Simran and JJ. Simran was my cousin, and JJ was her boyfriend. They'd started dating as teenagers, and I'd been something of a mentor to them. I gave them advice, helped mediate their arguments, and supported them like an older sister. Tragically, in August 2010, JJ had passed away suddenly from a severe allergic reaction. Bobby followed up with another message, thanking me for being there for his younger brother during such difficult times. I decided to check out Bobby's profile. We were both part of a close-knit community in London, and I'd heard about him through relatives and mutual friends. Bobby was from a well-respected Kenyan family, married, and living a life split between Kenya and the UK, constantly traveling for work. He was also a cardiology consultant. Though we'd never met in person, we knew of each other. Unlike random strangers you might come across on Tinder or other dating apps, Bobby and I shared a network of connections. Even my cousin Simran confirmed that Bobby was indeed JJ's brother. That foundation of trust was what made it so easy for Bobby and me to start talking. At first, it was casual, but soon, I became a shoulder for him to lean on, a safe space for his grief. We quickly hit it off and became friends. At the beginning, there was nothing romantic between Bobby and me, especially since he was married. I assumed he simply needed a friend and some support during a difficult time. Months passed after that first message, and soon we were talking every single day. Bobby's life seemed to unravel right in front of me. He divorced his wife, became disillusioned with his job, and appeared to be on the verge of a breakdown. According to Bobby, his life had turned into a complete mess. Around the same time, I had just come out of a long-term relationship myself. It felt natural that Bobby and I grew closer. About 6 months into our daily conversations, we finally met face-to-face at that club in Brighton, the encounter where Bobby didn't recognize me. It was strange, but what followed was even stranger. Let me take it step by step. Time moved on. Bobby relocated from the UK to Australia and remarried a woman named Sanj. He even invited me to his wedding. Although I didn't attend, I saw pictures of the ceremony online. Meanwhile, my own life was changing. I switched jobs, had the incredible opportunity to work at the London Olympics, and made new friends. I even found a new partner. For a while, it felt like Bobby had completely disappeared from my life, a distant memory. But then, in November 2013, 2 years later, Bobby came crashing back into my life. It all started when one of his friends posted a photo of Bobby lying seriously injured in a hospital bed, reportedly in a coma. There was no reason to doubt the post. It hadn't come from Bobby himself but from his friend. To make matters worse, my cousin Simran was in Kenya at the time and confirmed that the news was true. This incident pulled me into a private group chat with 39 other people, including Bobby's friend who had shared the post, his family, and his wife, Sanj. The group's purpose was to discuss how to support Bobby and explore ways to aid his recovery. I knew many of the people in this group, which only reinforced my belief that everything was legitimate. From that moment on, I became increasingly involved, doing what I could to help Bobby, even from a distance. But as events unfolded, I began to question everything I thought I knew about him. Everyone in the group knew each other indirectly through family, their shared community, or professional connections. They found comfort in supporting one another as Bobby gradually emerged from his coma over the course of several weeks. One day, Bobby regained enough strength to talk to me. However, he claimed to have partially lost his memory and couldn't recall the details of our earlier conversations. Despite this, he did remember me as a friend of his late younger brother, JJ. We spoke briefly before Bobby reportedly slipped back into a coma. And then came the devastating news. Bobby had succumbed to his injuries and passed away in 2014. The group of 39 mourned together, sharing messages of grief and support. Bobby's wife, Sanj, was heartbroken, as were his friends and family. But as you've likely guessed, this was not the end of the story. How could it be? After all, the love story hadn't even begun. A few months after Bobby's supposed death, I received an unexpected message from his widow, Sanj. She told me there was something important I needed to know and suggested that I speak to my cousin Simran, the same Simran who had once dated Bobby's younger brother, JJ. The request was odd, given that I wasn't particularly close to anyone involved in this tangled web. I had merely been a supportive friend to a grieving family, nothing more. Curious and confused, I called Simran. What she told me left me stunned. Bobby was alive and living in the United States under witness protection. According to Simran, Bobby had survived his injuries and was taken into witness protection after enduring paralysis, a coma, and a stroke. It sounded more like a movie plot than real life, but Simran insisted it was the truth. She also revealed that Bobby's wife, Sanj, had distanced herself from him while he was in the hospital. With his life in shambles, Simran claimed that I was the only person Bobby truly had left. She told me he had been so devastated at one point that he had attempted to take his own life. Shortly after learning this, Bobby reached out to me again. Slowly, we resumed our conversations. I didn't know what to believe anymore, but the pieces of his story seemed to align with what Simran had shared. Despite my doubts, I found myself drawn back into his world, determined to help him however I could. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of an even more bizarre and twisted chapter of my life. One day, Bobby confessed that he had feelings for me. By Valentine's Day 2015, we were officially in a relationship. At first, my feelings for Bobby weren't deeply romantic. I cared about him as a friend, someone who had been at death's door. Doctors and nurses had said he didn't have much time left. Given that we lived in different countries and there was no physical connection, I felt like I was simply trying to bring happiness to a gravely ill friend when I agreed to be with him. But then, miraculously, Bobby survived, and his health started to improve. As it did, I fell deeply in love with him, and it seemed like he felt the same way. The countless texts, voice messages, and calls I still have saved document the rapid progression of our romance. At one point, I asked Bobby to send me something of his, anything, to feel closer to him. He managed to convince a nurse to give Simran one of his shirts. When my cousin returned to London, I picked it up. We had a habit of talking on Skype for hours, sometimes even 13 hours straight. We'd cook meals together, watch shows and football matches, or fall asleep listening to each other breathe. It was the kind of intense, almost teenage infatuation where you want to be with the person 24/7. But there was one key difference in our relationship: Bobby's camera was never on. I never saw his face. Bobby claimed it was because of his injuries. His voice was perpetually a whisper due to damaged vocal cords, and he said he wasn't comfortable showing his face. He promised repeatedly to transfer to a hospital in London, detailing what he'd wear and imagining how our first meeting would go. But something always came up: a new health crisis, logistical issues, or family emergencies. This pattern repeated over and over. But one day, I received an unexpected message from Bobby. He said there was something I needed to know. At first, I thought it might be another excuse, another layer to the web of explanations he'd used to avoid meeting me in person. But this time, the tone of his message was different. It felt urgent, as though he was wrestling with something significant. My heart raced as I read his words, trying to prepare myself for whatever revelation was coming. What could it possibly be? Had he finally decided to tell me the truth about why he'd avoided me for so long? Or was this another twist in the strange, surreal story my life had become? I nervously typed back, asking him what he meant. He told me that 9 months earlier, before we were officially together, his ex-wife Sanj had become pregnant. She gave birth to a son on June 27, 2015. I told Bobby he needed to return to her for the sake of their child, but he insisted he had never loved anyone the way he loved me and wanted to be with only me. From that point on, Bobby involved me in everything. We chose his son's name together, picked out clothes for him, and Bobby sent me photos of the baby wearing the outfits I'd bought. These gestures reinforced my trust in him. Sure, I'd never seen Bobby's face on Skype, but why would I doubt him? He had a child, and I had picked out the clothes he wore. He had an ex-wife I'd chatted with in group messages. His family and friends were in Facebook groups with me, sharing photos and messages. How could any of it not be real? As time went on, Bobby's behavior grew more obsessive. He showered me with love, gifts, and promises. He even proposed, and we began planning a wedding for when he recovered and could return to London. But whenever things didn't go his way, Bobby would abruptly cut contact or claim his health was deteriorating, manipulating me into doing whatever it took to regain our connection and protect his fragile state. He was always sick, hospitalized with so many ailments that I couldn't even keep track of them all. Looking back, I see it as a form of control. His illnesses always overshadowed any of my concerns, making him the ultimate victim. How could I think of leaving him when I was consumed with keeping him alive? Over time, Bobby's influence over me grew. I found myself reporting where I was, who I was with, and what I was doing, out of fear that Bobby would become upset or, worse, claim his health was deteriorating. He even threatened to cheat on me with a nurse if I took steps to reclaim my independence, like finding a new job or going to the salon without informing him. I became isolated, telling my friends not to touch or hug me because I could belong to Bobby. I lost my job, distanced myself from my family, and cut off ties with most of my friends. Finally, in February 2018, after 3 years of dating, Bobby claimed he was coming to London. It was supposed to be our second meeting since the night in Brighton when he hadn't recognized me. I tracked his flight online, eagerly awaiting his arrival and ready to meet him at the airport. But Bobby insisted on stopping at a hotel first, saying we'd meet the next day. Then the excuses began. He wasn't feeling well. He had to rush to the hospital again. His grandmother had fallen gravely ill. Eventually, he claimed his own health was worsening, this time due to cancer. Frustrated and desperate, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I went to his supposed hotel, only to be told at the reception desk that there was no guest by the name of Bobby Jandu. Devastated, I called my cousin Simran, crying about how Bobby was avoiding me. Simran offered me comfort, but I could sense something wasn't adding up. After that conversation, Bobby called me directly. He said the hotel staff had informed him I'd been there looking for him. According to Bobby, he had instructed them not to reveal his presence to anyone because he wasn't ready to see anyone yet. At the time, I didn't even consider the possibility that Bobby might not actually be at the hotel. I was simply heartbroken that he didn't want to see me. This went on for several more months after Bobby's supposed arrival in London. More strange events began to surface when Bobby started pulling away again. He stopped answering my calls and responded to texts with brief, distant messages, claiming his health was worsening. While I had become accustomed to his health-related excuses, this time something felt different. I decided it was time to take action. Sometimes, a deeply buried intuition refuses to stay silent. I began verifying every detail I could about Bobby's story. I called hospitals where he supposedly received treatment, searched for any records of his stay in London, and dug for evidence. What I discovered was shocking. There were no records of Bobby Jandu being treated at any hospital. No documentation of his supposed strokes, surgeries, or hospitalizations existed anywhere. Confused but still unwilling to believe Bobby was lying, I reached out to his family. That's when I made the phone call that turned my entire world upside down. A relative, baffled by my questions, eventually admitted, "Kirat, I don't know what to tell you. Bobby couldn't have been talking to you. He's been living in Kenya with his family for years." Let's be honest, anyone in my position would feel dizzy from the realization that 10 years of their life were built on a lie. Meanwhile, my family had started pressuring me for a meeting with the man I was planning to marry. The mounting tension pushed me to my breaking point. To fully grasp this, you have to understand the culture and expectations I grew up with. As a South Asian woman in the UK, I came from a community where family values and marriage are deeply ingrained. Marriage isn't just a union of two people, it's a social milestone that brings honor to the family and is often seen as a life accomplishment, especially for women. When I first started talking to Bobby in my early 30s, the pressure to settle down was already building. The fear of running out of time to find true love and start a family made me accept Bobby's love, even in its virtual form. I agreed to a long-distance relationship, holding on to the hope that it would eventually lead to something real. My naive belief that Bobby would one day come to me kept me going. I lied to my parents, telling them I was dating him, while I spent hours alone in my car, drowning in the loneliness of a relationship that never seemed to progress. Part of me even hoped that if something happened to me, it might be better than facing the painful truth of my reality. All I wanted were answers. But none were forthcoming, so I did what I probably should have done years earlier. I hired a private investigator. What the investigator uncovered made everything far worse. Using digital traces and IP addresses, the experts confirmed that Bobby's account had been created and maintained from one location, Simran's house. Yes, that's Simran, my cousin. All those fake profiles, fabricated characters, stolen photos, staged conversations, and even the voice messages, everything had been meticulously orchestrated in a catfishing scheme run by Simran. But the question that haunted me more than how she pulled it off was why. Simran's deception was breathtaking in its scope and detail, and the question of why she did it loomed larger than anything else. What could drive someone to construct such an elaborate web of lies for an entire decade, using over 60 fake Facebook accounts to manipulate the life of their own cousin? Simran created an entire fictional universe around Bobby, complete with friends, family, and even medical staff. Each account had its own photos, backstories, and intricate connections to the fabricated life of Bobby Jandu. These accounts weren't just placeholders, they actively participated in group chats, offered updates on Bobby's health, and reinforced the illusion with convincing emotional messages. Simran's world was so thorough that even seemingly minor details, like well wishes from friends or updates from doctors, added layers of authenticity. When I finally gathered the courage to confront Simran, her response chilled me to the bone. "I did it for your own good. I just wanted you to be happy." I was devastated. The person I had trusted most, someone I saw as a sister, had not only betrayed me but had taken control of my life in ways I couldn't have imagined. The emotional toll was unbearable. I had isolated myself from friends and family, lost my job, and sacrificed my dreams, all for a fictional relationship with a man who didn't even exist. In my pursuit of justice, I turned to the police, hoping the law would hold Simran accountable. But that brought yet another heartbreak. The police were sympathetic but explained that cases of online deception are notoriously difficult to investigate. There were no significant legal consequences for Simran. She walked away unscathed, leaving me to grapple with the fallout of her actions. The betrayal left me battling severe emotional and psychological scars. I began therapy, trying to piece my life back together, but the damage ran deep. Simran's manipulation had stolen years of my life and eroded my sense of trust and self-worth. Although she faced no legal repercussions, her reputation in the community was destroyed. Friends and family turned their backs on her, appalled by the scale of her deceit. The climax of this tragic chapter came when I finally met the real Bobby Jandu. Bobby, who had no idea he'd been at the center of a decade-long conspiracy, was shocked and horrified. As I explained what had happened, Bobby was astounded to learn that someone had used his name, likeness, and family connections to orchestrate such an elaborate scam. He expressed deep empathy for me, recognizing the emotional toll this deception had taken. Together, Bobby and I tried to make sense of Simran's motives. Psychologists who later analyzed the case suggested that her actions likely stemmed from a deep need for control. By creating Bobby and crafting every aspect of his life, Simran gained complete dominance over my world. Her manipulation extended to controlling my decisions, isolating me from my support system, and forcing me to live entirely within the confines of her fabricated narrative. Experts speculated that Simran's behavior reflected traits of narcissistic personality disorder or possibly even antisocial personality disorder. The lengths she went to, maintaining over 60 fake accounts, coordinating intricate interactions, and sustaining the deception for years, pointed to a lack of empathy and a pathological need for validation and control. When the truth came out, my family was as devastated as I was. Learning that Simran, a beloved relative who was like a sister to me, had orchestrated such a cruel deception shook us all to the core. The disappointment and grief were overwhelming, not just for what I had endured but for the irreparable fracture in our relationships. Healing is an ongoing process for me. I continue therapy, working to rebuild my life and regain my confidence. While Simran's actions left lasting scars, my resilience has been my strength. I'm determined to move forward and find peace despite the betrayal. My story is a powerful reminder of the dangers of blind trust in the digital age and the strength it takes to rebuild after unimaginable betrayal. This ordeal wasn't just my personal tragedy, it shook my entire family. Once the truth was revealed, they rallied around me, offering unwavering support to help me rebuild my life. They provided emotional strength, assisted with therapy, and surrounded me with love and care, determined to help me overcome the fallout of this decade-long deception. They recognized how important it was for me to feel supported and valued after being stripped of so much. Many of them tried to make up for what I had lost, my time, my confidence, my relationships, due to this elaborate scam. Even Bobby Jandu became a source of encouragement. Though he had been unknowingly used as a pawn in this cruel scheme, he stood by me as I worked to reclaim my sense of self and trust in others. For Bobby, the experience was a sobering reminder of how easily someone's identity can be exploited in a world dominated by digital connections. My story is a cautionary tale about the dangers of the virtual world and how even the people closest to us can deceive us. It's a reminder to be vigilant, to question what feels off, and to protect yourself from manipulation, no matter who the perpetrator may be. Now, I want to turn this over to you. What are your thoughts on my story? Could you ever forgive such a betrayal from someone close to you? How would you cope with discovering that your life had been manipulated in such a way? I'd love to hear your perspectives in the comments. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories and insights. Your support means the world.